The last image captured on the university security camera showed Aino Makinen walking toward the edge of Rovaniemi's campus, her red winter coat a stark contrast against the pristine Arctic snow. It was December 21st, the darkest day of the year, when the sun barely kissed the horizon before disappearing again. Her footprints led toward the Kemijoki River, where the ice gleamed like black glass under the pale aurora. Then, nothing. Just empty snow stretching toward the frozen wilderness beyond, as if the earth itself had swallowed her whole. The silence that followed was different from the usual Arctic quiet. It was loaded with unspoken terror, heavy with questions that would haunt this Lapland community for years. Her phone lay abandoned on a snow-covered bench, still warm from her touch, the screen displaying an unsent message that read only, "I understand now what grandmother meant about the calling." The message cursor blinked mockingly in the polar darkness. Security footage showed her walking with purpose, not fear, as if she was keeping an appointment with destiny itself. Her breath formed small clouds in the 30°C air, each exhalation a countdown to vanishing. Local Sami elders would later whisper that such disappearances happened during the darkest nights, when the boundary between worlds grew thin. But what really happened in the vast and unforgiving Lapland landscape remains a secret that neither the most experienced Scandinavian search and rescue systems, with all their technology and dedication, were able to uncover, and that, to this day, haunts the eternal silence of these Arctic lands. Aino Makinen was more than just another university student. She was a living embodiment of Finland's ancient connection to the Arctic wilderness. Born and raised in Rovaniemi, the official hometown of Santa Claus and gateway to Finnish Lapland, she had grown up under the dancing northern lights and the endless polar nights that defined life in this northernmost region of Europe. At 22, she was pursuing a master's degree in Arctic environmental studies at the University of Lapland, driven by an almost mystical passion to understand the delicate ecosystem of her homeland and its indigenous peoples. Her professors described her as brilliant, but increasingly obsessed with ancient Sami traditions and their spiritual relationship with the land. Dr. Christina Borg, her thesis advisor, noticed that Aino's academic focus had shifted dramatically. In recent months, from scientific environmental data to ethnographic studies of traditional Sami shamanic practices, Aino spoke fluent Finnish and Swedish and was learning the endangered Northern Sami language from her grandmother Ristin, who still lived in the traditional way in a remote village near the Norwegian border, maintaining the old customs that had sustained her people for thousands of years. She spent her weekends hiking alone through the snow-covered taiga forests, photographing the aurora borealis with an almost religious devotion, and collecting samples for her thesis on climate change's impact on Arctic wildlife and traditional indigenous hunting patterns. Her Instagram account, followed by thousands of nature enthusiasts worldwide, was filled with breathtaking images of the midnight sun casting eternal twilight over reindeer herds, the endless white expanses that stretched beyond imagination, and mysterious stone formations that locals whispered held spiritual significance. Friends knew her as someone who could navigate the wilderness with an almost supernatural instinct, reading the subtle signs of weather changes, animal movements, and seasonal shifts that most Southerners would miss completely. She had survived solo camping trips in 40°C temperatures and once helped rescue a lost German tourist during a sudden blizzard, guiding him to safety using traditional wayfinding techniques her grandmother had taught her. Her connection to the land was so profound that locals joked she had ancient Sami blood running through her veins, despite her purely Finnish heritage. She often spoke of hearing voices in the wind and feeling called by the spirits of the tundra, statements that her modern university friends dismissed as poetic metaphor, but that made the village elders nod knowingly. However, behind the tranquil life in the Nordic lands, there were details that no one had noticed, details that would become crucial to understanding how someone can simply disappear in one of the most organized and safe regions of the world. When Aino failed to return to her dormitory by midnight on December 21st, her roommate Elina Hautala initially wasn't concerned. Aino often spent nights photographing the aurora borealis or camping alone under the stars, even in the depths of the Arctic winter. when temperatures dropped to life-threatening levels. But when she missed her 8 a.m. lecture on Arctic ecology, a class she had never skipped in 3 years of study, Elina knew something was terribly wrong. The University of Lapland's security team reviewed the camera footage and discovered the haunting final image of Aino walking purposefully toward the Kemijoki River, her red coat disappearing into the swirling snow like a drop of blood absorbed by white fabric. Within 2 hours, the entire Rovaniemi community mobilized with the efficiency and solidarity that defines Nordic society in times of crisis. The local police contacted the Finnish border guard, who immediately deployed their specialized Arctic rescue unit, equipped with thermal imaging technology and survival gear designed specifically for subarctic conditions. Volunteers from the Sami reindeer herding community joined the search, bringing their traditional knowledge of the land, their intuitive understanding of how people move through the Arctic wilderness, and their ability to read signs in the snow that modern equipment might miss. The search team grew to include professional mountain rescue trackers, helicopter pilots experienced in polar flying conditions, and even military personnel from the nearby Sodankylä Jaeger Brigade, Finland's elite Arctic warfare unit. They deployed thermal imaging cameras capable of detecting body heat through meters of snow, ground-penetrating radar units, and specially trained search dogs whose enhanced senses could detect human scent even under layers of ice and wind-blown powder. The Kemijoki River presented particular dangers. It was only partially frozen, creating treacherous conditions where someone could fall through thin ice and be swept away by the powerful current flowing beneath the deceptively solid surface. Local fishermen who had known every curve and current of the river for decades joined the search, using their ice fishing equipment and intimate knowledge of ice thickness to probe beneath the frozen surface. The aurora borealis danced overhead, in sheets of green and blue light, as hundreds of searchers combed methodically through the snow-covered forests, their flashlights creating a constellation of hope in the endless polar darkness. The temperature dropped steadily throughout the night, reaching 35 degrees Celsius by dawn, conditions that would make survival without proper shelter virtually impossible for even the most experienced outdoors enthusiast. The sound of snowmobiles, helicopter, rotors and shouting voices echoed across the vast silence of Lapland, a desperate human effort against the indifferent immensity of the Arctic wilderness. If you're interested in mysteries of disappearances in Nordic landscapes, leave a like to help us continue bringing these unique stories from Scandinavia, because what we discovered about the first hours of the search would reveal how even the most efficient systems can fail before the vastness of the Nordic landscape. As the search entered its third day without any trace of Aino, the investigation took on the methodical precision and thoroughness characteristic of Finnish law enforcement agencies. Detective Inspector Mikael Virtanen, a veteran investigator who had handled missing person cases across the vast wilderness regions of Lapland for over 15 years, immediately recognized the unique and formidable challenges posed by the Arctic environment. The wilderness surrounding Rovaniemi stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, an endless expanse of snow-covered taiga forests, frozen lakes, and tundra where temperatures could kill an unprepared person within hours of exposure. The perpetual polar night of December meant that for most of the month the sun never fully rose above the horizon, creating a surreal twilight world that could disorient even the most experienced outdoors enthusiasts and Arctic survival experts. Virtanen's investigative team discovered that Aino's last confirmed location was near the bank of the Kemijoki River, but heavy snowfall had been occurring for 3 consecutive days before her disappearance, effectively obscuring any potential tracks, footprints, or other physical evidence that might indicate her direction of travel. The Finnish Meteorological Institute provided detailed weather analysis showing that on the night Aino disappeared, a sudden and severe Arctic storm system had moved through the region, bringing wind gusts of up to 80 kilometers per hour and reducing visibility to less than 10 meters, conditions that could cause even experienced Arctic travelers to become completely disoriented within minutes. The search operation expanded dramatically to include the surrounding municipalities of Tervola, Simo, and Tornio, with specialized rescue teams using snowmobiles, cross-country skis, and even reindeer-drawn sleds to cover the vast and difficult terrain that vehicles couldn't access. Investigators interviewed Aino's professors extensively, uncovering the disturbing revelation that she had been researching an unusual and potentially dangerous phenomenon. The traditional Sami belief system that identified certain locations throughout Lapland as thin places, sites where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds became permeable, especially during the darkest days of winter. Her thesis advisor, Dr. Christina Borg, revealed that Aino had been spending increasing amounts of time at remote archaeological sites connected to ancient Sami shamanic practices, often camping overnight at locations that local Sami elders considered sacred or spiritually significant. The investigation uncovered evidence that Aino had been in regular contact with her grandmother Riston, who lived in a traditional Sami village near Inari, deep in the heart of Finnish Lapland. Riston spoke only Northern Sami and Finnish, but through a cultural interpreter familiar with traditional beliefs, she revealed that Aino had been asking increasingly specific questions about ancient stories and legends, particularly tales of individuals who walked between worlds during the darkest and most spiritually potent days of the Arctic winter. The Finnish border guard expanded their search parameters to include the vast Urho Kekkonen National Park, a protected wilderness area where Aino had been known to hike alone, often for days at a time, following traditional Sami migration routes that had been used for thousands of years. But as the investigation advanced through the inhospitable landscapes of the north, each new piece of evidence only deepened the mystery, confronting investigators with the uncomfortable reality that Arctic nature guards its secrets with an implacable and ancient power. 3 weeks into the investigation, with no trace of Aino discovered despite the most extensive search operation in Finnish Lapland's recent history, several theories emerged that were uniquely tied to the Arctic environment and deep-rooted Finnish cultural beliefs. The first theory, proposed by Dr. Elias Nurmi, a psychiatrist specializing in Arctic mental health disorders at the University of Helsinki, focused on the severe psychological effects of the polar night phenomenon. Dr. Nurmi explained that the complete absence of sunlight during the winter months, combined with the extreme isolation of Arctic living, can cause severe depression, disorientation, and what locals refer to as Arctic madness, a documented condition where the endless darkness and social isolation can cause otherwise rational people to make completely irrational and potentially life-threatening decisions. This condition particularly affects young people who are already under significant academic or personal stress, sometimes leading them to wander into the wilderness in a fugue-like state. The second theory involved the treacherous and deceptive nature of river conditions during the Arctic winter. The Kemijoki River, despite appearing completely frozen and safe to cross, contained numerous areas of fast-moving water beneath the ice surface that created dangerously unstable conditions throughout the winter months. Local river guides and experienced fishermen identified several specific spots where the ice was particularly thin due to underground springs and thermal vents, and investigators considered it entirely possible that Aino had fallen through the ice and been swept away by the powerful current flowing beneath the deceptively solid surface. The third theory was far more disturbing and deeply rooted in traditional Sami cultural beliefs that most modern Finns had dismissed as ancient folklore. Aino's grandmother, Riston, along with several other elderly Sami villagers, genuinely believed that her granddaughter had been called by the ancient spirits of the land during the winter solstice. According to traditional Sami belief systems that had persisted for thousands of years, certain individuals with an unusually deep spiritual connection to nature could be summoned by the spiritual guardians of the Arctic during the darkest and most spiritually potent time of year. While most contemporary investigators dismissed this as primitive superstition, they couldn't ignore the documented fact that Aino had been increasingly interested in shamanic practices and had been making regular visits to sites considered sacred by the Sami people. The investigation also revealed that Aino had been in contact with a small group of neo-shamanic practitioners who believed that the winter solstice represented a time when the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds was at its thinnest. Her internet search history, recovered from her laptop computer, showed extensive research into traditional Sami Joik songs, ancient rituals performed during the polar night, and detailed studies of shamanic initiation practices. Most troubling of all was the discovery that she had been researching historical accounts of individuals who had allegedly disappeared into the spirit world during previous winter solstices, never to return to the physical realm. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next mysteries from the Nordic lands, because what happened next would challenge all expectations about disappearances in one of the safest regions in the world. 6 years after Aino Mäkinen's disappearance, the mystery that had haunted Rovaniemi and captured international attention was about to take an absolutely unprecedented and shocking turn. The city had experienced rapid growth during the intervening years, driven by increasing Arctic tourism, climate research initiatives, and expanding university programs, leading to ambitious new construction projects throughout the greater metropolitan area. In March 2023, during the brief Arctic spring when construction work becomes possible again after the long winter freeze, a team of construction workers was preparing the foundation for a new state-of-the-art Arctic research facility near the University of Lapland campus. The building site was located approximately 800 meters from where Aino was last seen on the security cameras, in an area that had been thoroughly searched multiple times during the original investigation by professional rescue teams, volunteer searchers, and even military personnel using the most advanced detection equipment available. Markus Leto, the experienced foreman of the construction crew and a Rovaniemi native, who had actually participated in the original search for Aino 6 years earlier, was operating a large hydraulic excavator when the machine's heavy steel bucket struck something unusual, buried approximately 2 meters beneath the surface of what appeared to be ordinary Arctic soil. At first we thought it was just a large boulder, or maybe some old construction debris left over from previous building projects, Leto later recalled to investigators. But when we cleared away more soil and started digging around it, we realized it was something completely different, something that shouldn't have been there. What they had uncovered was a carefully constructed underground chamber built with traditional Sami stonework techniques that appeared to date back centuries, yet showed signs of recent modification and use. The chamber was approximately 3 meters wide and 4 meters long, with walls made of precisely fitted fieldstones that had been sealed together with a mixture of clay, organic materials, and what appeared to be traditional Arctic construction, methods passed down through generations of indigenous builders. Dr. Sanna Aikio, a prominent Arctic archaeologist specializing in Sami cultural sites, was immediately contacted and rushed to the construction site, and what she found inside the underground chamber defied all logical explanation and challenged everything investigators thought they knew about Aino's disappearance. The space contained what appeared to be a sophisticated modern survival shelter, complete with carefully arranged sleeping areas, preserved food supplies that included both traditional Sami preparations and contemporary camping rations, and even a small but effective heating system that utilized a combination of traditional Sami techniques and modern survival technology. But the most shocking and emotionally devastating discovery was Aino's distinctive red winter coat, the same one she had been wearing in the final security camera footage, neatly folded and placed on a stone altar-like structure in the center of the chamber, like an offering to ancient spirits. Next to the coat was a leather-bound journal written entirely in Aino's distinctive handwriting, documenting her final weeks before disappearance and revealing a truth that no investigator, family member, or search team member could have possibly anticipated or prepared for. And it was at this moment that the investigation took a completely unexpected turn, revealing that the Nordic landscapes hide mysteries much deeper than anyone could have imagined. Polar night. The chamber had been built by her grandmother Ristin and other elderly Sami practitioners as a place for Aino to undergo a spiritual transformation that required complete isolation from the modern world. And it was at this moment that the investigation took a completely unexpected turn, revealing that the Nordic landscapes hide mysteries much deeper than anyone could have imagined. The discovery of the underground chamber sent shockwaves through both the Finnish authorities and the international missing persons community. Detective Inspector Virtanen, now 6 years older and preparing for retirement, was called back to oversee the investigation into this extraordinary find. The journal entries painted a picture of a young woman who had become increasingly convinced that she was destined to follow an ancient Sami spiritual path. According to her writings, Aino had been experiencing vivid dreams and what she described as calls from the spirits of the land for months before her disappearance. The entries revealed that her grandmother Riston had been secretly preparing her for a traditional shamanic initiation known as the Dark Journey, a ritual that required complete isolation during the polar night and was traditionally performed by those called to become spiritual guides for their communities. The Finnish National Bureau of Investigation expanded their resources to include experts in Sami culture and traditional practices. Dr. Aikio explained that such initiations were extremely rare and typically involved the candidate spending weeks or even months in complete isolation, often in underground chambers or remote wilderness locations. The practice had been largely abandoned during the 20th century as Sami communities became more integrated with modern Finnish society. However, a small number of traditional practitioners still maintained these ancient rituals in remote areas of Lapland. The investigation revealed that Riston had been working with several other elderly Sami practitioners to construct the chamber over many years, using traditional building techniques that required no modern tools or materials. The chamber's heating system was based on ancient methods that used stored body heat and carefully managed ventilation to maintain survivable temperatures even during the harsh Arctic winter. The preserved food supplies included traditional Sami preparations such as dried reindeer meat, fermented fish, and Arctic berries that could sustain a person for extended periods. Share this video with someone fascinated by Nordic mysteries. They'll be amazed by this twist and by what's about to be revealed about the secrets that the northern lands keep. As investigators delved deeper into the chamber and Aino's journal, they uncovered a truth that challenged everything they thought they knew about the case. The final entries in the journal, dated just days before her disappearance, revealed that Aino had willingly entered the chamber to undergo the shamanic initiation, believing it would transform her into a spiritual guide capable of bridging the gap between traditional Sami culture and the modern world. But the most shocking revelation came when forensic experts determined that the chamber showed signs of recent habitation, not from 6 years ago, but from much more recent times. The journal contained entries that extended far beyond the date of her disappearance, documenting a spiritual journey that had apparently continued for years. According to these later entries, Aino had indeed undergone the transformation she sought, but the process had required her to exist in a state between the physical and spiritual worlds, emerging only during specific times of the year when the conditions were right. The investigation took an even more extraordinary turn when thermal imaging revealed a complex network of underground tunnels connecting the chamber to other locations throughout the region. These tunnels, apparently built over many generations by Sami practitioners, created a hidden world beneath the Arctic landscape that allowed initiated individuals to move unseen across vast distances. Dr. Aikio's team discovered evidence that similar chambers existed at other locations throughout Lapland, suggesting that the traditional Sami spiritual practice was far more extensive and organized than anyone had realized. The forensic evidence raised impossible questions. If Aino had been living in this underground world for 6 years, how had she survived? The preserved food supplies, while extensive, could not have sustained someone for that length of time. Yet the journal entries were clearly in her handwriting, and carbon dating of the materials suggested they had been created at different times over the past 6 years. The chamber contained modern items that had been manufactured after her disappearance, including a water purification system and advanced cold weather clothing that had somehow been acquired and brought to the underground location. But even with all the advanced technology and Nordic search systems, questions remained unanswered that would echo forever through the vast Scandinavian landscapes. The revelation of Aino's underground existence created a crisis that rippled through the entire Rovaniemi community and beyond. Her parents, who had spent 6 years believing their daughter was dead, were confronted with the possibility that she had been alive all along, living in a hidden world beneath their feet. The discovery forced the Finnish government to acknowledge that traditional Sami spiritual practices were far more complex and extensive than previously understood. Social workers and psychologists were brought in to help the family process this impossible situation, but no amount of professional counseling could prepare them for the reality that their daughter had chosen to abandon the modern world in favor of an ancient spiritual path. The university struggled to understand how one of their brightest students had become so deeply involved in practices that seemed to belong to a different century. The local Sami community was divided, with some elders confirming that such initiations still occurred, while others insisted that the traditional practices had been dormant for generations. Risten, Aino's grandmother, was interviewed extensively, but maintained that she had simply been following the ancient ways and that Aino had been called by forces beyond human understanding. The international missing persons community studied the case intensively, recognizing that it challenged fundamental assumptions about how people disappear and where they might be found. The chamber became a site of pilgrimage for those interested in indigenous spiritual practices, while Finnish authorities struggled to balance respect for Sami culture with the need to understand what had really happened. The psychological impact on the search and rescue teams who had spent weeks looking for Aino was profound. They had to confront the possibility that their sophisticated technology and methods had been inadequate to find someone who had chosen to disappear into a world that existed parallel to their own. And thus, while some answers were found in the unforgiving landscapes of the north, others remained buried forever in the eternal mists and infinite silence of the Nordic lands. This case reminds us that even in the most organized and safe societies in the world, the vastness of Nordic nature continues to be a human mystery, capable of making people simply disappear, leaving only echoes in the eternal landscapes of Scandinavia. The discovery of the underground chamber opened more questions than it answered, forcing investigators to confront the possibility that traditional indigenous knowledge contains truths that modern science struggles to understand. The Finnish. Authorities ultimately classified the case as resolved but unexplained, acknowledging that while they had found evidence of Aino's fate, the fundamental mystery of her disappearance remained intact. The chamber was carefully preserved as both an archaeological site and a reminder that the relationship between humans and the Arctic landscape is far more complex than most people realize. Dr. Aikio's continued research revealed that similar underground networks existed throughout the circumpolar north, suggesting that indigenous peoples had developed sophisticated methods for surviving and thriving in environments that would be hostile to most modern humans. The case became a turning point in how Finnish authorities approached missing person investigations in areas with significant indigenous populations, recognizing that traditional knowledge and practices needed to be considered alongside modern investigative techniques. Aino's story became a bridge between two worlds, the ancient Sami spiritual traditions and the contemporary understanding of human behavior and survival. The journal she left behind was eventually published, with the permission of her family, as a testament to the power of indigenous wisdom and the deep connection between humans and the natural world. Her transformation from a modern university student to a practitioner of ancient Arctic spirituality challenged assumptions about identity, belonging, and the nature of reality itself in the far north. If this story of disappearance in the Nordic lands impressed you, leave a like. Subscribe to the Nordic Missing channel, share with those interested in Scandinavian mysteries, and activate the notification bell for our next cases. In the comments, tell us your theory about this disappearance. We love your perspectives. And remember, in the vast Nordic landscapes, there are always more mysteries waiting in the eternal mists of the north. Until the next mystery from the Scandinavian lands.